Welcome to the Deep 404. There's some interesting news, and this is a big hat tip to Alexander Mercouirs of the Duran. Larry Johnson, ex-CIA, who has the Sonar 21 website, in an interview this week, he has indicated that his sources in the US military are telling him that the recent spate of attacks on US forces in the Iraq and Syria bases there, the US have about 3,500 troops spread between Iraq and Syria. Since the October 7th Hamas attacks, so over the last month, there have been about 40 attacks on US bases and convoys in the area, and the mainstream reporting is that there have been very little damage sustained to any troops. However, Larry Johnson is reporting that it is being kept quiet, that there have been significant injuries, that there have been numbers of US troops wounded, taken to military hospitals. He's only announced this just this week, but it will be interesting to look at this over the coming months and weeks and months to see if more information comes out about this and if this is confirmed. If this is correct, what Larry Johnson is reporting, then this is an escalation. If the American military is starting to lose troops in Iraq and Syria due to reportedly Iranian-backed militia groups, then if this is the case, this will be adding pressure to the likelihood of US involvement, which is being driven by neocons, US hawks, who are looking for a reason to get into a fight with Iran. Reuters are also reporting that there may have been a near miss at the Erbil air base for some American troops, where again reportedly fired by Iranian militia, a drone smashed into the second floor of a barracks there, but failed to detonate. So while it made it through the US base, the base's air defences struck a barracks. Fortunately for those in the barracks, the drone, which was packed with explosives, failed to detonate, and there was limited injuries. Someone perhaps was concussed, but you can imagine it would have been a very different story if that had detonated. Apparently it hit at about 5 a.m. in the morning in a barracks there. Just a note too on Hamas, as we talk about the Middle East. Now, there has been some reporting that Hamas is an Israel-created entity. So I did a little bit of looking on this. What seems to be the case here is that, and there are reports from Israeli people within the military, and Israeli officials that lend weight to this. However, what seems to have been the case was that back in the 80s, Israel was favouring and looking to keep the PLO, Yassar Arafat's secular Palestinian liberation organisation. The Israelis did not like the thought of them gaining the power that they were, and so, as often happens, financing and some funding goes to the opponents of the group that you don't like. So there is an Israeli official, Brigadier General Yassar Arafat, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the 1980s. He has told a New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a counterweight to the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Fatah party. So he said that the Israeli government had given him a budget and that he would give that to the mosques. And he says that Hamas is, to his great regret, an Israel creation. So I think, there's some truth to this statement. These sort of things happened in the past with other organisations like this, where they've been funded for one reason when they were smaller, to make them be, as he says, a counterweight against some other less preferred entity, and then over time they grow and become the problem you were trying to stop. So it seems that here that is the case, that there was some Israeli funding that went to the early leaders of the group that has become Hamas now. But it doesn't appear as though it was a direct creation of the group. There is some other speculation out there and talk that Mossad were involved in creation of Hamas. Again, that's not something that I can confirm, but I think even with what is easily verifiable, you can see that there is some truth to the story, and I think it's relatively easy to understand why and how that could happen. Now, if Mossad had set out to actively create that group for some other purpose, there may be some truth to that too, but I've not been able to find information that verifies that. But again, Mossad, an intelligence agency, the possibility of them planting agents into organisations like Hamas, the PLO, I'm sure that would be something that you would be trying to do so as to be able to gather information on those organisations. I think that's pretty standard fare for any undercover organisation. The same with undercover police trying to put undercover cops into the mafia and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if both of those stories have some truth to it in some respect. Gaza too, just a little bit on Gaza. One thing that I think is important to note is that Gaza has been under Israeli military control since 1967. And since that period of time, the area has been under control. What has gone in and out of Gaza has been policed. Finally, in 2005, the Israeli forces withdrew from Gaza. However, they have continued to blockade Gaza since that time. So there's been air, land and sea blockade of Gaza. Anything that goes in and out of Gaza is policed and checked by the Israeli military. The United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross, they consider this blockade to still be an ongoing military occupation, is their position on it. Such is the effect that the blockade and restriction of goods, materials, medicines, technology, finance is, the effect is that it's like a military occupation. Now, the reason I mention this is because you also hear arguments sometimes that, the Israelis in the areas of desert, they've cultivated it and turned it into arable land, and it's now fertile and they're growing things there. Agreed, 100%. There's Israeli, some of the work they've done with limited water and supply in areas like that, and regenerating areas has been amazing. However, I don't think you can then use that as an argument against the Palestinians and say the Palestinians have done nothing with the land. In Gaza, if you are blockaded, if you are unable to travel, if you are unable to invite people to the area, if you're unable to look for finance, if you're unable to import technology, then your ability to do anything with that land is severely restricted. I think that's pretty straightforward, really, and dispels that argument. And I've mentioned this because I've just heard this a few times. People saying the Palestinians just do nothing with the land anyhow. Again, if you look at the West Bank, the West Bank is cut up into three areas: Area A, B, and C. Now, areas A and B are areas of. Area A is an area of Palestinian control within the West Bank. Area B is a combined Palestinian-Israeli controlled areas. And then everything else of the West Bank is Area C, which is non-Palestinian areas. Now, you often see on a map the West Bank as being cut off on a map as an area, and you would, without looking any closer, think, oh, that entire area is Palestinian controlled. No, not at all. The bulk of the West Bank is not inhabitable by Palestinians. That is, they are excluded from those areas and kept out. It's not even a contiguous block of land within the West Bank, which is Palestinian land, which you could then perhaps do something with in one group by having control over a whole area. It is the Palestinian areas of the West Bank are, I would suggest, best referred to as an archipelago of islands. That's what it looks like. It's just a whole bunch of small, oddly irregular shaped areas within the West Bank, which are the Palestinian areas. Again, I think with a lot of people who haven't looked too closely would assume the whole West Bank area is Palestinian. It's not. More, I think it's 61% of it is Israeli controlled. The remaining area is either is Israeli occupied or non-Palestinian land, and that is, there are areas within the West Bank where the Palestinians are not permitted to travel to. Things like trying to purchase permits to be able to develop land in the West Bank area are given out at like a 20-to-1 rate or more to Israelis over the Palestinians. So the Palestinians are extremely restricted in any ability to develop in any area to develop technology, to develop agriculture, to develop manufacturing, mining, or anything like that. There is just no ability for the Palestinians to do this within the areas that they have. And that would be a major change if there were, let's get into extreme speculation mode here, but if there were, let's say, a rollback in time to a two-state solution as it was first proposed, and there was a bunch of contiguous land that was considered to be the Palestinian state, the Palestinian people then would have the ability to be able to do something with that land if they had unrestricted access in and out of their state. The ability to bring people in, to bring funding and finance in, and develop infrastructure and all that sort of thing. The Palestinian people would be in a very different position to the way that they are today, but that's not the case. Going forward is very interesting, and if people want to. If you're watching this and you want to comment on this, I would love to hear people's thoughts or read people's thoughts on how you feel this conflict will ultimately resolve itself. The concept of the two-state solution, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, I mean, I think ideally that if that were to work, that would be great. What I don't see now is how that works with the level of anger and hate between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't think that there's going to be a quick resolution to this situation, overthrow of Netanyahu, Arab world demanding that we go back, and the US agreeing, yes, we go back to the two-state solution, and we carve off a big chunk, and that's Palestine, and Palestine is now free. That, I think, is, and for many people, what they would like to see, but not something that I can see how we get to that situation, at least not at this stage, and not for, I imagine, decades. There are other scenarios for what could happen in this area, which are far less less desirable, yet when I consider them, they are ones which seem to fall more into the realm of possibility. And they are situations like either Gaza is leveled, destroyed, and the Palestinians are forced out or killed. And then perhaps that same approach is applied to the West Bank, and Israel becomes one block, and Gaza and West Bank are just absorbed into it, and there are no Palestinians in Israel. It's unlikely. I don't think that would be an achievable outcome, but I think there are people who would like that outcome. The other being that the conflict erupts and Turkey decides to become involved, and Turkey drags Iran in, and Hezbollah join, and Syria join, and effectively it is the reverse of that, and Israel is wiped from the map, and the Israelis are either forced to leave or are killed, and you end up with now just a Palestinian state. Again, I don't. It's not something that is, I think, a desirable outcome, although some people certainly desire it. But again, it's something which is at least in the realm of possibility. There have been wars before, so a war could erupt, and if it were to be the Turkish and Iranians and Syrians and Hezbollah from Lebanon fighting with Hamas, and the Houthis and from Yemen fighting, and then Saudi Arabia giving tacit support, then that kind of thing could occur. What I think would be, unfortunately, more likely is that if Israel felt that threatened, then they would leverage nuclear capability. I think that they would get to that point where if they felt that they were truly existentially threatened with their existence in its entirety, and they have nuclear capability, which I have no doubt that Israel does have nuclear capability, that would push them to the point where they would lash out and use it. Now, again, how that wins for them, I don't know if it does. It might result in the same end situation, because clearly the Israelis can't be dropping nukes on themselves to keep the Turkish and the Iranians out, assuming that they do decide to go to war with Israel. So they fire the nukes further afield at Tehran, perhaps. But then you get the retaliation. Then you get the Turkish, who will get nukes from Pakistan, and they will then fire them back into Israel. And so Israel ends up getting obliterated anyhow. So while there has always been this sort of impasse, it's being heightened now. It's being brought to a level where, if we aren't careful, we may find ourselves rapidly approaching one of these paths. And as I say, I'm interested to see what people think. Maybe someone out there has thought of a clever scenario and set of steps to take us out of the situation we're in, into a position where actually peace can exist in the area. Now, I mentioned a little bit in yesterday's video, or I spoke a little bit about Douglas Murray, because Douglas Murray I found to be a very intelligent man. I've enjoyed watching some of his talks on topics in the past, but was surprised to see his opinions on Israel and Hamas. Being as one-sided as he clearly is on the topic, I would have expected a more balanced view. But again, where I feel that he is coming from here, and I think this is part of the fundamental challenge, is he's coming from the position of the ideological, religious differences between the Christian world, Jewish faith, and the Muslim faith, and ultimately, getting to a point where you are able to find some cohesive and durable peace in the area amongst all of those players and those ideologies. Now, again, these things can happen, but I think we have to carefully navigate a way there. You hear many stories, of people of different faiths living side by side, living in peace for periods of time, and then you have problems where there is war and fighting, and I do wonder, if it's what the catalyst is there. If there is for some reason there is a wrongdoing done to one side, or if there is just a desire for power and land. How we get, when I say we, I'm talking about the global we, how we get out of this situation safely will be a testament of our global skills of diplomacy and intelligence. If we do end up with a major conflict erupting in the Middle East and perhaps even nuclear warfare, then I think in the future, if we're all still around, we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and say, that wasn't good at all. There's change coming because of what's been happening here and in Ukraine. In Spain, on the topic on Spain. So there's been 4 days of rioting in Spain, in Madrid and through Spain. And this has happened because of the outcome of the June 23rd Spanish election, where the Popular Party gained the bulk, about 38% of the vote, but the PSOE, which is the Partido Socialista Obrero Español party, the Socialist Party, came in second, I don't know, maybe 32% of the vote or something. And they have, in order to form a ruling government and sort of coalition, they have just signed an amnesty deal with the Catalan separatists and their party, the Junts party. Now, Pedro Sanchez, who is the head of the PSOE, has just done this, and this has triggered rioting where, as often happens, a party will get the bulk of the votes, yet they are not able to get a majority, an outright majority, and they then struggle to form a coalition, and they're unable to form a government. And so instead, you find a party that doesn't get the bulk of the votes, isn't the most popular party in the country, yet it is aligned with another of other smaller ones that they are able to form a ruling coalition. So here, what has sort of inflamed this is that the Catalan region of Spain, it's a beautiful area of the world. They are looking for independence, and so the Catalan separatists, they held a referendum, and effectively some of them have been in exile in Brussels for a number of years, and they would have been facing sort of treason and sedition charges back in Spain because of their plans to separate Catalonia region. What Pedro Sanchez has offered to them in this amnesty deal is that their leaders can come back from exile. They can now be back Spanish citizens. They can work and promote the Catalan cause. And this has just been seen as a unacceptable sort of violation of the law, effectively, just to gather their votes and support so that the socialist government they can form and take government, which will give Pedro another 4 years, I think, in leadership there. So riots in Spain over the government. Germany, the Olaf Scholz has got an election in June 2024 in Germany. Now, there have been elections recently in some other areas of Germany, and the results there for Scholz's party has not been good at all. His party and the Greens have suffered and performed very poorly. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, they're considered right wing. They're not that right wing, I don't feel. Anyhow, they are polling very well. Scholz's policies of war with Russia, which has led to energy problems for Germany and the deindustrialization of Germany, their immigration problems, their green policies with restricting nuclear power and restricting any form of sort of limiting development of any sort of oil, gas products, and replacing all of these things with green alternatives, is leading to real challenges in Germany. And so all of that's likely to lead to his downfall, which will then likely put into position someone who is less inclined to support Ukraine in the future. Recently we had the Slovakian elections, and Fico got in there. Now, Fico got in on a platform of, or Fico, actually, I think that's how it's pronounced. Fico got in on a platform of no more support for Ukraine, and so that has happened now that he's in. Of course, then we've got the American presidential election coming up in November of 2024. Biden's got real problems there. Obviously he's got the failed Ukrainian venture tied to him. He has got corruption and claims swirling around him and his son Hunter. He has got the loud whisperings of an impeachment inquiry. Reportedly, Mike Johnson, who's the newly elected House Speaker, is not particularly keen at this stage on pursuing impeachment for Biden. The reason seeming to be that they consider Biden's polling so low at the moment that it's just not worth it, that they don't feel like he'll be around. He'll be out. They just had the presidential debate for the Republican Party. Vivek Ramaswamy cut it up. It was the clear winner in that debate. He managed to get under Nikki Haley's skin. Now, Nikki Haley has been around since became sort of prominent around when Trump was in power. She is a very war-focused, hawkish sort of person. Is keen for the US to get involved anywhere around the world and believes it's needed for US security. She seems to be avoiding the real US domestic problems, things like the fentanyl crisis they have, the immigration challenge they've got now. Douglas McGregor, I heard speaking about this, saying that from sources he has in Homeland Security, that it is reported that there are 8 million illegal immigrants in the US. Apparently his sources laughed and said, no, it's more like 28 million. So that's a lot of illegal immigrants in the country, undocumented people. And the concern there is that they just don't know who those people are, why they are there, what their plans might be, what their affiliations might be, what their ideology might be. Yes, for things like that, the cultural challenges they're having, America's debt, all of those sort of domestic problems, a number of the candidates didn't really seem to focus on, and they were more focused on on foreign policy and war. I think that's where Vivek will make up some ground by focusing on some of those. However, while he's doing good, Trump's polling is still good. Trump polls better than Biden considerably. There is a large group of Americans, I think, who will, if it came down to a choice between Donald Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy, I think that they would vote for Trump because they know him and because, quite simply, he's entertaining. Which I know sounds like a silly reason to vote for someone, but people vote for people. That's the way our Western democratic systems are set up. You don't get to vote for policy. We don't have some system where you just see policies put in front of you and you go, I would like that policy and that policy and that policy, and then a bunch of people come in and say, okay, we get paid to make these policies happen. And the bulk of the country said we wanted policy A, and then policy C, and then policy S. And so that's what we're going to focus on. We don't have that. We have these personality contests where you have, the leaders of the different parties looking as handsome and beautiful as they can and trying not to say the wrong thing to anyone and saying the right thing to everyone, and spending months and months and months electioneering and not actually doing anything in terms of running the country and delivering on policies. But because you do that, you'll vote for people. People will vote for Trump because he's interesting, he's exciting. If he's back, you know that the 4/5 of the American media will be venomously against him, and that the headlines will just be interesting with him in play. So things are going to change over the next year or so in terms of leadership, in terms of support for Ukraine. A few months ago, I remember some reports were starting to come out, and the word was that if Ukraine, with President Volodymyr Zelensky, hadn't shown success on the battlefield in Ukraine by December, then the US funding would drop off. And we're seeing that already. Since then, since that was first rumoured, we've seen Poland saying no more support and France saying no more military support. The struggle with the US to get funding approved for Ukraine. So, and the numbers being smaller that are being approved by nations. So we will see that there will be a drop off for support for Ukraine. And this is terrible for the people of Ukraine. The people who are being drafted in. Now, if this footage that I saw yesterday was correct, look, I'm assuming it is, but I can't confirm it. But it was reportedly of a Ukrainian woman soldier surrendering. And as the Russian soldiers approached her, she was reportedly yelling out, please don't beat me, I'm pregnant. So, just Ukraine's getting to the stage of looking to draft and bring women into combat, or at least into the rear, but then they're being, getting involved in combat situations as the Russians advance on positions. The youth of Ukraine are and have been slaughtered. The soil of Ukraine is enriched with the blood of the youth, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. It's like the stories you heard about World War I, and it's difficult to believe that it's happening today again in a nation, in a modern European nation, that they are losing the youth of their nation through war. It's terrible, and even if the conflict in Ukraine were to stop right now, Ukraine is wrecked economically. It is wrecked. It is in debt up to its eyeballs. It is damaged in terms of infrastructure, in terms of communication systems, in terms of energy delivery. It has lost in losing the Luhansk and Donetsk areas. It has lost some of the most fertile areas of Ukraine. If the Russians do push further down past Zaporozhye, down to Kherson, and then Odessa, and take Odessa, then Ukraine becomes a landlocked country. With Odessa becoming Russian, it loses access to the Black Sea. So it loses its ability to just openly trade and ship freight like it did in the past. So Ukraine is in a terrible position overall. In terms of the fighting and what's been going on, so look, the Russian force across the entire front line just seems to be solidifying and growing in strength. All along the front line, there are reports of Russian advances, small advances, and taking positions in the Bakhmut or Chormutsk region. Reportedly the Russians, and I can put this up on the screen so we can have a bit of a look at this. So this area just here is Bakhmut. This is Bakhmut here, and this is Klishchiivka and Andriivka. Now, reportedly, the Russians are advancing west in Bakhmut area due to the fact that Ukrainian resources are being pulled out of this area to go in fight in Avdiivka outside Donetsk. Now, the main areas this seems to be happening where the Russians are now making progress again is Klishchiivka here. The Russians are back into the northern parts of the township of Klishchiivka, and in Andriivka here. Now, Andriivka there is the train line running past Andriivka, which the Ukrainians had pushed back and claimed. Reporting is now that the Russians have taken the train line back again and are being able to solidify their positions along here. Let's just move out a little bit here. Yeah, here we go. Avdiivka, which is just to the northeast of Donetsk here. So this is where this seems to be the primary point of the front line at this stage. And here again, the pincers are being closed off around Avdiivka. There's some reporting that I picked up here, commentary from the front line. There are successes of Russian troops on the northern ledge in the area of the Avdiivka settlement. Stepovoy up here, more Russian advances to the outskirts of which the Russian troops advanced. The control zone near the railway in that area is expanding. So this is the railway line along here, running up through here, which was the main supply route in here. That's now being cut off with Russians controlling more of that rail line. At the coke plant, if we just zoom in a little bit here, of Avdiivka, this is the coke plant area up here. This is the coke, the waste heap, but these are heights which the Russians have captured and been able to use those heights to look down over all of Avdiivka and also out this way to the approaching supply roads. At the coke plant, the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces are constantly being attacked. There is a slight advance of the Russian army in the southern direction near the Tsarskaya Okhata Recreation Center. And the Ukrainians are forced to constantly transfer reinforcements to Avdiivka from other sectors on the front, reducing the reserves of the second echelons. So this area here really is becoming very painful for the Ukrainians. They're drawing in reserve forces from both the north up here and from the south, bringing them in to try to be able to secure Avdiivka. The concern is that if Avdiivka is lost, if the line is broken there, then the Russians will be able to push through if they choose to. Push through with Donetsk as their main supply hub behind them to push through, roll around the flanks here to the south and to the north, and be able to do this because the Ukrainians have been focusing so much on Avdiivka and Bakhmut, with their resources being consumed there, that reportedly they haven't taken the time to build strong defensive positions behind the lines. So they feel that once the Russians get past Avdiivka, that moving westwards will be easier for them because the Ukrainians just don't have the mind-reinforced defensive positions. And, you know, things then, this might then be when we start to see perhaps Russian forces moving in from Sumy, from the north, moving in through here, and looking to then circle around and capture all of the Ukrainian forces in this area, effectively do a large pincer activity. Russian forces push up past Zaporozhye, past Dnipro, come down from Sumy to Poltava and encapsulate this entire area here and basically seal it off. That's one theory that has been discussed by a number of people, including Weeb and Weeb Union on YouTube. If you haven't, watched Weeb's channel, check out Weeb. He's got very interesting insights. So that sort of thing could be happening if Avdiivka falls. In southern Donetsk area, Urozhaina and Staromayorsk, now they're on the Vremka ledge. Let's just zoom in here a little bit. This area here, now this is where the Ukrainians had some success originally in the offensive. We're pushing down through Naskuchny and Makharivka down here to Urozhaina. Reportedly today, there is reporting of a large Russian offensive assault being prepared. It's reported as being not a normal assault. Large numbers of significant numbers of armoured equipment being pooled and prepared by the Russians, and that if this attack were successful around Urozhaina here and Staromayorsk, that the Russians would then be looking to undo the advances of the Ukrainians down the ledge and may look to then push them back up this way and straighten out this bulge, this salient here, the Ukrainian salient in the line. Moving down, just a little bit of an update down here in the Zaporozhye region of Robotne and Verbova, still heavy, strong fighting going on here. Just some reporting from the front line. The Zaporozhye front is characterized by the transfer of any enemy attacks in this case Ukrainian attacks, to the west from Robotne. Constant and strong artillery shelling and counter battles at Verbova over here. Ukrainian attacks on civilian infrastructure in the rear. So reportedly Ukrainian artillery attacks going over the heads of where the lines of combat are into some civilian areas in the rear. There's also some talk of that going on in the Kherson region as well. Reportedly, the Ukrainian armed forces are still using armoured vehicles and trying to break through the Russian defences. Several runs a day in this area. They are, the Russians here reportedly just, impressed by their own soldiers and commanders' ability to hold back the repeated and constant attacks from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians obviously just slogging it out with all that they've got here, but they do appear to be just smashing themselves against a wall and not making progress. In the Kherson region, down near the islands of the Dnieper River, down here around Krinky, the Ukrainians have got across the river, some of the islands. They have established some positions here and are holding them. However, they appear to be holding them at a great cost. Again, there is some questioning from some of the frontline Russian reporting just as to what the logic is of the Ukrainian assaults here. People are just questioning like what the plan is if the Ukrainians do establish a sort of a foothold here in any numbers, what the plan is to do there, where they will go, what they will achieve without there being any likely support from anywhere else along the line. Others are suggesting that the Russians are effectively allowing, to some extent, the Ukrainians to cross the river over here and to set themselves up in positions, because it's making them relatively easy targets to then go and aim the Russian artillery and the Russian air forces with their Fab 500s there. However, there is some talk of Ukrainian helicopters operating in this area. So there has sometime been talks of a push across from the Kherson region. But no reporting at this stage that the Russians feel that is imminent, and just confusion around what the goal is here with trying to get some Ukrainian forces across the Dnieper River, given that they do seem to then just be suffering from Russian bombing and artillery in that place. One last thing that I just wanted to mention, which was interesting. I was looking at a video by Brian Beletic from the New Atlas, which was interesting. Brian was talking about how he believes that the United States are priming the Philippines to become their new Ukraine, but the Ukraine in the Pacific, in the conflict, in the fight against China. So the Philippines came under American control in about 1898, thereabouts, after the Spanish-American War concluded. The Americans annexed the Philippines. They got Puerto Rico and the Philippines and somewhere else I can't think of, as the proceeds of defeating the Spanish in that war. So that's the connection, why the US connection with the Philippines. Now, there are people officials in the Philippines now who are looking to perhaps loosen their ties to America, because they feel as though to some extent they're still under American control. America has a large number of military in the Philippines. But the topic was interesting, that while other Asian nations are working with China in its Belt and Road Initiative, the Philippines has just cancelled some deals there with China, and the US is very strongly trying to shore up support from the Philippines, and the idea being that would provide the US with their launch pad and support in a conflict with China. So if we just zoom out a little bit here. Here's the Philippines here. Here's Hong Kong here. here's Taiwan and China there. So as you can see, having for the US having strong military presence in the Philippines, up in Luzon Island, up here, will be crucial for them in any sort of conflict, direct conflict relating to supporting Taiwan. Now, the Taiwan one is interesting. When you think of how China must feel with America providing arms and support for Taiwan. So on one side, the Americans are saying, "Oh, we believe in the one China policy, which is that Taiwan is part of China." Yet on the other hand, while saying that, going, "Oh yeah, but we're arming the Taiwanese so that they can be independent from you if they choose to be." But it's interesting. The Taiwan just there off the coast of China, just how the Americans would react if, I don't know, let's just say Baja California here decided that they wanted to be independent, and China said, "Oh, no, we believe with the one US policy, but by the way, we're giving weapons and stuff to these guys, so if they want to become independent, they can fight you." It's just, in some respects, I find it amusing, the sort of the hypocrisy. Much like the Ukrainian conflict, how a lot of people will say, "Oh, NATO expansion had nothing to do with it." Well, you just imagine, Russia's saying, "Well, we don't want NATO US weapons right here on our border," and again, you imagine how the Americans would feel if, for example, the Chinese had said, "You know what? With Canada, we've made good friends with Canada, and we're going to support them now, and we're just going to put a whole heap of Chinese missiles right along the border here with of Canada facing into the US." You don't mind that, do you? It's not a threat, purely defensive. It makes me laugh. Anyhow, if you've watched the show, I hope you have enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.